We are going to get started with our first workshop. This first workshop is on proposed revisions to policies JEA, Compulsory Attendance, JLCB, Immunizations, JKD, Suspension, and JKE, Expulsion. So, Mr. Superintendent, are you going to kick us off?
I really don't have anything to say. I'm just going to turn it over to Mr. Thompson.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. This suite of 4 policies we're reviewing tonight, the policy committee reviewed at their August 24th meeting and reviewed the proposed changes and kind of adopted to move forward for the full board's consideration. So as the chair said, we're looking at JEA, compulsory attendance, immunization, suspension, and expulsion. So, and I'll say all of these, and I'll in just a moment step through kind of what the proposed changes are to the policies. I think the context is, in some respects, somewhat straightforward. By and large, virtually all of the proposed changes are required legislative changes based on, and I'll speak to it for each one, based on recent, changes to legislation that impacts each of these policies. So essentially, I worked with our counsel at Drummond, to get the updated, kind of legal language to have our policies conform to now the existing Maine law. And that was what the policy committee reviewed again at our August meeting and what they, voted to bring forward to the full board. So most of these, or virtually all of these proposed changes really, wasn't a lot of discretion. It's just to bring them into kind of alignment with existing Maine law. But that being said, just to make everybody clear and aware of what those changes are, I'll summarize them and have the document with the proposed red line changes, in board docs for everybody's consideration. So the first policy, JEA, is the Compulsory Attendance Law. This one is actually based on legislative changes that happened in the spring of 2019. So, nominally, we could have updated this previously. The key things that are in the changes to this policy is, one, it lowers the required age of enrollment from 7 years old to 6 years old. So required to be enrolled by 6 years old. And then also significantly, anybody who chooses to enroll their student in kindergarten at 5 years old is thus then required to have consistent attendance. So if you do enroll at kindergarten, you must remain enrolled or subject to other, kind of truancy, and other kind of elements. So those are the primary changes there, moving it to kind of, what is, by and large, kind of certainly here in Portland, the age configuration of our schooling and across the state. There are also just kind of additional changes as we try to do with all of our policies to update around consistent naming, as it refers to the board and the district, and then the gender neutral pronoun usage. So those are the proposed changes to the compulsory attendance law. The immunization law, as well, as you may remember, was a significant law that was passed in 2019. There was a referendum about that as well that upheld the law. But essentially, again, all of the proposed changes there reflect the new legislative requirements. So, it adds a requirement for this MCV4 vaccine. Most, controversially, historically eliminated the religious or philosophical beliefs exemptions and allows the district to exclude students who pose a public health threat. And there were some other minor changes around gender pronoun usage. In this law, just specifically, part of why it was, or I looked back to bring it forward was that this is the year of implementation of the new law. So as of this school year, anybody who had had one of those religious or philosophical exemptions needed to demonstrate updated vaccination, proof of vaccination. So we wanted to get our policies kind of in alignment with, what's happening in practice. So those are those two policies. Then the second two policies, suspension and expulsion, come from the passage this past June of a bill that was around elementary, essentially limiting, in the case of suspension and an expulsion, eliminating the use of expulsion for elementary school students. So this was a law that was passed in June and is scheduled to kind of go into effect. I believe it's at the beginning of October in terms of implementation. So on the suspension policy, we did add a little bit of an update at the beginning, as we've tried to do in our discipline policy revisions, to add some language at the introduction of the policy to frame kind of what we view as the purpose of suspension. But from there, then we are just proposing the adoption of the legislation around limiting the use of suspension in students grade through 5 and below. And for the expulsion policy, similarly based on that same law, and eliminates the use of expulsion for students in grade 5 and below. So adopting our policies to kind of conform with that. If you may remember, certainly around suspension, we had conversations about the role of suspension at elementary school at that time, and it kind of tabled that issue. And certainly with the passage of this law kind of brings us up to date, essentially, with where some of those conversations had been at that time. So those are the proposed changes to those policies, and you can see the red line versions. So,
Thank you so much, Mr. Townsend. Are there questions from the board? Mr. Rodriguez, our policy committee chair, please go ahead.
So not so much a question, just as policy committee chair, just to share, I want to thank the members of the committee for going through these quick revisions quickly. As Assistant Superintendent Townsend said, these were mostly just to fall in line with legislative changes. Again, pretty straightforward. The policy committee did not have, I think, anything that stood out in terms of our discussions. But we did recognize that the immunizations policy might catch people's attentions right now. So we wanted to be clear about the legislative, what we're trying to achieve here, and not be misleading in any way. Other than that, I know we're in a workshop, not official meeting. Want to give a shout out to South Portland Representative Victoria Morales, who sponsored the bill that passed that made this change possible. It's something that I was strongly supported. And even though suspensions at the elementary school level were really rare here in Portland Public Schools, this could have a really positive impact throughout the state, where resources limit school districts, and suspensions, unfortunately, have to be used as a means to, for districts to manage their day-to-day needs. And of course, that disadvantages our students. Also important in this bill, recess cannot be taken away as a means for student discipline. So that also a really, really positive impact throughout the state. So again, just want to commend Victoria Morales for her effort there. That's it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rodriguez. All right, any questions on these policies? So just again, our intention is to have these policies on our agenda for second read at our next meeting, meaning that we would have a further opportunity to ask questions, and then hear from the public. If there's any public discussion, any public comment, we would have our discussion, and then we would vote on the policies at our next meeting.
And on that note, just if there are any, if there's anything between now and the board meeting that, jumps out at you that you want to have further discussion about, it'd be great to know in advance so that we're prepared and can, hopefully move these through to approval at the next meeting. So just anything that you have in between now and then would be great to know.
Terrific, thank you. So that concludes this first workshop. Thank you so much, Mr. Townsend.
Sure thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Townsend.